Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming. This is our first Writers at Home event of 2023, and we're excited to be here. I'm Jennifer McGhee, and I'm the interim coordinator of the Great Smokies Writing Program. Thank you to Malaprops for hosting us and to you all for your support. Before we begin, I have a few announcements regarding upcoming events. First, on Wednesday, January 31st, just before his reading at Malaprops, fiction writer and writing teacher Peter Turchi will join UNCA students and Great Smokies students from 3:30 to 4:30 in the Mountain View Room for a free reading and writing workshop. There's more information on that at our website. Also, on Saturday, February 25th, Lauren Harr will present Submission Saturday from 10 to noon. In the Reuters Center. Lauren is co-founder of Gold Leaf Literary Services, which provides a range of pre- and post-publication assistance for authors, and she's worked in the book world for 20 years. She's going to talk about cover letters, queries, pitches, bios, keeping track of submissions, and allow time and space during that time for people to work on submissions. This will be a ticketed event, and we're going to be posting more information on our website. So keep checking back for that. Also, the North Carolina Writers Network wanted us to share a couple of announcements. One, the Thomas Wolfe Fiction Prize closes January 30th, so you have a little while longer to get those entries in if you would like to. They're also hosting 2 online classes. They're day or just evening workshops. One is writing romance novels readers will love. That'll be on January 26th. And another is writing young adult fiction that shines on Thursday, February 2nd. So see their website for more information. And last but certainly not least, Great Smokies classes begin next week. We're offering both online and in-person classes. I'll be highlighting a few of our courses as we talk today, and you can find more information about all of those on our website, greatsmokies.unca.edu. It is now my pleasure to introduce Tina Barr. Tina is leading two workshops this semester. The first one is full, which we're thrilled about, and the second one begins March 13th. It will meet on Monday afternoons, and the title is A 3-Ring Circus, Expanding and Developing Your Poems, and that class will meet on Zoom. Tina's most recent book, Green Target, won the Barrow Street Press Poetry Prize and the Brockman Campbell Award. Previous books include The Gathering Eye, winner of the Tupelo Press Editors Award, and Kaleidoscope. She's received fellowships from the NEA, the Tennessee Arts Commission, and the Pennsylvania Council on the Arts. Her poems have been published or are forthcoming in the Harvard Review, the Gettysburg Review, Alaska Quarterly Review, American Journal of Poetry, Crosswinds, Brilliant Corners, Barrow Street, North American Review, Mudfish, Tar Poetry Review, Poetry South, and elsewhere. Welcome, Tina.
Thank you so much. When I get an introduction like that, I feel like, oh my God, it must be real. Anyway, thank you, Jennifer. And also, thank you for Patricia for being the Oz behind the scenes. So this is really fun for me today, one, to read with you all. And also, because I'm reading 3 poems I've never read before. They have been published in journals, but it always feels really risky to me. I mean, I have poems I know, go over well. But these who knows? So it's kind of fun for me to read ones that, I don't know. Anyway, the first one is called Gradatum Ferociter, which means to sort of climb ferociously. I'll just read 3 poems, and I've timed it for 10 minutes. So in the beginning of this poem, there's a wasp nest, and I mention Jeff Bezos, whom we all know is the owner of Amazon. It's really an eco poem, so I do talk about climate change. And I mentioned the word croc in the middle of the poem, and it's about a woman who brings a real crocodile into a jewelry store. So, Gradatum Ferociter. Wasps pulse over combs, hexagonal cells, hidden in the crevasse where the car's door shuts. Pressed together, the empty host of combs is like stuffing Amazon might use to pack. Bezos will take the Blue Origin rocket into space, paid for by our orders and the Pentagon. He's climbed step by step ferociously. Eventually, we'll all be able to go. 10 minutes for $500,000. Once at our cabin, hail the size of ice cubes spilled on grass. NASA's found Greenland's glaciers melt from beneath like cut sugar cane. The seas will rise along coasts 16 inches by the time a child born today is 80. Crocodile bags can cost more than a space flight. In 1975, La Donna, an actress from Mexico, trailed a croc into Cartier, so they made her a necklace. 2 crocs hinged at their tails like Siamese twins. Their heads rested on her chest, scaled with emeralds, rubies in their eyes. Ferocious, not friendly, as the settlers who gave tribes wool coverlets, taken off those dead from smallpox. For some, gold is poetry. The mistress of an old boyfriend's banker at her chalet west of Geneva had basketfuls. Bulgari, bucciolati. Bezos wants colonies, will live in pockets on space modules. But Bezos is no Bach. I'm married to a jazz composer, so he plays Bach and Chopin. I listen to Mozart when I need to calm down. The next one is a much shorter poem. It's called New Year's Eve, and I figured it was timely since it's early January. New Year's Eve. Farley brings speckled trout, each iris gold, pupil black, their tinfoil slippery, insides pink. We push back their skins with a butter knife. Eat one side, peel up their spines. The bones make the veins of a white leaf. Eat the other. He's keeping an eye on a buck. Seen antler scrapes on bark. He'll hunt with a bow. Promises I can watch when he guts it. Shows me photos on his phone. 11 bulbs of ginseng he's dug, like ginger root. $800 worth. Western light fills amaryllis. Petals shimmer like red spinnakers. I've actually been growing amaryllis since it feels like the end of October, and it's now mid-January and the first one finally bloomed. So this next poem is fun for me because it's a real risk, because it's so self-revealing. And I feel like I'm, coming out or something. But I've had chronic fatigue syndrome, which is a lot like long haul COVID, since 1989. And I haven't talked about it much, but in this next book manuscript, I do. And it's a really complex disorder with no biomarker, and it's caused by a virus. And the poem is called The Gamble, and there's a metaphor of chess throughout it. In the second strophe, I mention ancient Greek vases, amphorae. The most famous ones are red-figured Greek vases. Anyway, the poem's called The Gamble. And I have to say, it's really fun to share this with you all, because I feel like I've got on my screen, I've got a series of like really good listeners, and that's really nice for me. Okay. In the sixth game of his match against Spassky, Fischer made his move, Queen's Gambit. Cold, hyper-vigilant. This was years after, age 13, he had sacrificed his queen in a game of the century. At an IQ of 180, frightened, he lived inside his head. Eidetic image, second nature, playing steps ahead, his imagined pawns, rooks, bishops, all threats slid in for the kill. At 14, I tried to make a Greek red-figured vase, spun globs of flecked clay to heavy paperweights, but read about red-figured, black-figured, incised, two-handled vessels. Perseus, Hercules, helmeted like pileated woodpeckers, launched spears, wielded shields. The cloaked Spartan boy, rather than flinch, let a fox eat his innards. Fischer's fox leapt and circled in his brain. My queens are syringes of red liquid, a concentrate of B12. My rooks derivative of pig's liver, brain, heart in emu oil. Liquid from crushed aronia berry, powdered French oak in capsules. Many little pawns I swallow to sleep. The king, my body. An invisible virus has an end game. A doe slips downhill, ears, pointed nose, hide gray as tree bark. She sidesteps any stalker, becomes invisible to me, not prey, grace. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tina, for that beautiful reading. Next up, we have Allie McGhee. Allie is teaching a workshop titled Character Study, Writing Compelling Characters with the Enneagram, which sounds so interesting. The class is going to be on Zoom on Monday evening, starting February 20th. Allie has a PhD in English literature from the University of Rochester. She's the culture and team development leader for 6 a.m. City and is a core faculty member at the Enneagram School of Awakening. She is also an International Enneagram Association accredited professional. Her work has been published in Dark Mountain, Slippery Elm, Holler, Scallywag, Lucid News, The Maps Bulletin, and WNC Magazine. And she has shared stories at Story Parlor, Dogwood Alliance's Woods and Wilds Festival, and on the podcast Craft with a Stranger and Listen to This, Stories on Stage. She is currently completing her first novel, a post-apocalyptic horror sci-fi story about people turning into trees. Welcome, Allie.
Thank you so much. And thanks everyone for being here. I am excited to share this excerpt from the aforementioned post-apocalyptic novel. There are actually two apocalypses in this novel. One of them is a virus. The second one is the transformation into trees. So clearly very popular topic still, as we are still in the pandemic. So thank you for bearing with me. And you're going to meet just a couple of characters from the novel. And if you're curious, the kind of main character in this scene, Dominic, is an Enneagram 3. And Leela, the woman he is talking with, is a 9 with an 8 wing. So he'd met her in the fall as Harvester raged through Guatemala and crossed into Mexico on a horde of fleeing flesh, from death to death. It wasn't in the States yet, but its arrival was imminent, despite all of the walls erected, the robot-controlled towers that doled out machine gun fire on the doomed. They were all living a fantasy, pretending that there was a path out of the inevitable, a tomorrow in which they wouldn't be extinct, or worse, him included. She was petite, fine-boned and somehow like a songbird, with a long neck, high cheekbones, and an unruly mop of curly dark hair she pulled back into a blue handkerchief, half fortune teller and half homemaker from a distant past. She was sitting on the edge of the park downtown, the cards spread in front of her on a table whose top was crisscrossed by a painted-on chessboard. She was between customers and eating a sandwich, lost in thought. It was a little chilly that day, the first noticeably cool day in a while after another oppressive summer. The shift had sent people flowing outside to walk on their breaks or call in sick, and throngs of them filled the sidewalks, listening to buskers or buying hot dogs or tacos from street vendors. He walked by once and saw her, noticed the cards fanned out and face down. He got to the edge of the park, which was only another few feet on, and then turned around and walked back to her. She looked up from the sandwich and then quickly wrapped it back in its foil. She swept a few errant crumbs from the table in front of her. "How much?" he asked. $5 for 3 cards, she said. $10 for a larger spread. "Which do you recommend?" "How much time do you have? The bigger spreads give more detail." "Let's do 3, he said, checking the time on his phone. "I'm on my lunch," he added. It was almost an apology. She pressed dark red lips together. "You got it, boss." She began to shuffle, cards ticking between her fingers rhythmically, making a sound like a metronome. He was pulled to the cards, watching them slide against each other with the ease of water. "Think about your question," she said, "and then hold these and shuffle." She held the stack out to him, smiling. There was a small gap between her front teeth. "I'm really not sure," he began, taking the cards and immediately dropping a few onto the gray sidewalk. He bent down to get them, spilling a few more in the process. "Well, you must be wondering something if you felt pulled to me," she said once he had righted himself and had a good grip on the cards. "But if not," she twirled a dark chestnut ringlet around her index finger, looking off. At first, he thought she was being coy or making fun of him, but then he realized she'd almost frozen in place and was looking off at something in the distance, past the edge of the park, with wide, fearful eyes that seemed almost to have turned black. He looked that way and saw nothing. Well, not nothing. There were people out enjoying the day. A busker leaned over a handpan, its tinkling sounds flowing out for passersby who dropped bills into his faded black cap. A small crowd had gathered. A little girl was twirling to the music. Nothing out of the ordinary. He cleared his throat. Was she having some kind of stroke? Was she on drugs? What did she see? She suddenly spun her head back around, as if she'd just recalled he was there. She said, flustered. She raised a hand to her hair and smoothed it. He had the strange thought that she was petting herself. He smiled at her, as if to assure her everything was okay. He hadn't even really noticed. "How long do I..." he started, then stopped with a laugh, shuffling some more and catching her eyes with his own. "Oh," she said, brightening, "just until you feel finished." "I'm terrible at finishing anything," he said, a bit too sheepishly. "So I guess I'm done." He handed the cards back to her. She took them, closing her eyes and bending over them as she held them up to her heart. She whispered softly. He couldn't quite make it out, but it sounded like another language. Spanish, maybe? Or Italian? She spread the cards out in front of him, their dark blue lined backs contrasting with the black and white squares of the table. "Pick 3, she said solemnly. He held his hand above the stack, moving it this way and that over the cards slowly. He drew a card, handed it to her. She turned it over. "El carro," she said, "the chariot." She set it down, looked at him. "You are directing your journey," she said. "You have a vision that is strong, and you're guided by a balanced and true intuition. You should trust yourself and be wary of outside influence if it doesn't align with your personal integrity. You'll know immediately if something will take you off your path." She pointed at the man on the card, a beneficent-looking fellow standing on the chariot as if it were a throne. 2 steeds of fire moved the cart forward, and he clearly controlled them, though he held no reins. Be wary of becoming too arrogant, she said. The fires of transfiguration can blaze through you just as much as they can lift you into the stars. She looked at him, dark eyes sparkling. Next. He hovered over the cards again, plucking one from closer to the middle. El Mago, the mage, she said as she turned it over. Well then. Is that good? He asked. The cards are neither good nor bad, she said. They're tools for illuminating what's happening in you and your world. They can go either way. It depends on you. You ultimately have the choice. He mused. He stared at her. A curl of her hair fell over her kerchief, unruly and wild. Her olive skin was luminous, seeming to draw in the sunlight and radiate it back out. She bit her lip thoughtfully as she looked at the card. The mage wields great power, she said. They have the ability to channel energy. Their motto is, as above, so below. She pointed to the androgynous mage on the card, swathed in deep green robes embellished with stars and planets. See how they're pointing up with one hand and down with the other? She asked. He nodded. That's the directional energy of the mage, she explained. They could draw energy up from the below or down from the above and send it out anywhere. That seems like a good thing, he said. It is, she said. It's un gran poder, a great power. But wielded irresponsibly or selfishly, it can grow very dark. So you must beware of that. The mage has the ability to make others see as they see. That can be very destructive, depending on the vision. What was his vision, he wondered. He had aspirations, of course, but he'd sometimes wondered at his purpose in the wider world, in the universe of things. Perhaps it was his art, though he'd grown tired of trying to fit it into a life in which he had to push every day just to make a living. There was so little space for it. He was still young, only in his early 30s, but he was at the top of his law firm at a startling young age after finishing his law degree at the top of his class. He hated it. And la última, she said, the final card. He fished one out quickly, thoughtlessly, and handed it to her. She turned it over, then stopped. Is something wrong? He asked. No, she said, shaking her head a little too aggressively. No, it's just a little familiar somehow, this reading, like I've seen it recently. She laughed nervously. I guess that's what they call déjà vu, she said. Anyway, she cleared her throat. El Rey de Espadas, she continued, the King of Swords, reversed. The card was right side up to him, but upside down in her orientation. Reversed, he laughed. Can we turn it around? Her eyes flashed. No, she said quickly. Her tone had shifted. The sword suit is about power, drive, strength, she continued, but reversed, the qualities become perverted, dark. This king is the lord of the whole suit and must use his power responsibly, but the reversed king becomes a tyrant, and in this suit, he rules via violence and intimidation. She paused and glanced at him. If the king is truly in your future, whether he is you or someone close to you, take care, she said. Power can corrupt even the best of us, and circumstances like a reversal of fortune often have life-altering results. If you are or know this king, beware. Many follow him, but he leads them into great darkness. This is beginning to sound a little less like the Force and more like the dark side, he said. It's not a bad metaphor, she replied. Whether it's your own or someone else, a reversal of fortune may be in store. The shift may come, but from a source that's entirely unexpected. Well then, he said, I guess I'll have to think about all of that. How much do I owe you? He held out his hand. Sorry, Dominic, he said. Now that you've looked into my soul, I guess I should probably introduce myself. She took his hand in hers. She was warm from the sun, and a sensation like electricity ran up his arm. Leela, she said, giving his hand a shake. And don't worry about some of the darker possibilities, really, she went on. Sometimes the cards just mean that you need to look at a different layer of your life. Sometimes you won't know what they mean until much later. She smiled. Let's give you one more card on the house, she said, to make up for that king if nothing comes of it. It'll only take a minute. All right, he said. She held the deck out to him and he took it. Just grab whichever one I feel like, he asked. That warm electric tingle was still traveling up his arm. You got it, she said. He fanned the cards across the table and slid his fingers over the pile. He finally pulled one all the way out, handing it to her face down. She turned the card over and drew her hand back as if she'd been stung. On the card was a dark beast with horns and fiery red eyes. He had 3 faces, one in front and one on each side. In each face, he chewed a person, bloody and wrapped in chains. Well, that looks way worse than the king, joked Dominic. He looked up at her. Her eyes were wide, and she was staring at him in horror. I'm sorry, I have to go, she said. She swept up all the cards and dropped them into a drawstring bag, tightening the cord. But hey, what about... He held out his money, but she kept backing away from him. Keep it, she said. I remember who you are now. And she turned abruptly and walked off, leaving him alone in the park, bewildered and squinting into the afternoon sun. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Allie. Next up, we have Sebastian Matthews. Sebastian is teaching a class titled Mastering Techniques of Memoir and Personal Essays. That class will meet online on Wednesday afternoon, starting February 22nd. Sebastian is the author of a memoir, In My Father's Footsteps, and 2 books of poetry, We Generous and Miracle Day. His hybrid collection of poetry and prose, Beginner's Guide to a Head-On Collision, won the silver medal at the Independent Publishers Book Awards. His new book, Beyond Repair, Living in a Fractured State, a Memoir and Essays, came out in 2020. He is also the author of The Life and Times of American Crow, a collage novel in paperback. Learn more about Sebastian and his work at sebastianmatthews.com. Welcome, Sebastian.
Hey, thanks a lot. Appreciate it. I'm going to read 4 relatively short prose pieces from a new book in process called In and Among. And it kind of comes out of the Beginner's Guide book and the Beyond Repair book. It's a set of encounters for the most part, most of them in the present, the last couple of years, and some of them are memory pieces in the past. These are all relatively recent. This one is called Along the Lakeshore. In amongst a gallery of scrub brush, our morning trio is transformed into an undulating clump of stalks. The hawk circles back, and as it banks over the lake, releases a prehistoric complaint, proving how you feel inside rarely lines up with the effect your physical presence on the surrounding environment. The end of June approaches. In only 2 days, we head home. Within the hour, it will be officially warm. A butterfly flits inside a miniature forest of swamp grass, a single lily a day away from uttering its name. Hopping from treetop to treetop, a pair of crows shadow our path, letting us know we've entered their zone and should soon leave it. The tinkle of a bell allows bikers to pass. Up ahead, a runner and her dog bob up and down. The trail empty on the way out, fills with recreational use on the way back. We're here just before the lake's summer season begins. Swims or more brief dips off the dock. The blue line remains, windy day or calm, marking where sandbar ends and lake becomes deep and cold. The job of art is to make you see things you haven't noticed, make anew the things you have, or both, which means a good walk should take the place of your abiding attention. Or so it seems for this little group we've become this morning, here on this walking path, lipping the lakeshore. I wrote that piece after watching a documentary I recommend highly called The 5 Seasons of Pete Udoff. And he's a landscape gardener and kind of a visionary. And the piece opens with a quote from Pete Udoff: "You load yourself up with beauty, then you bring that out in your art." And the piece came from, for some reason, we watched the movie first thing in the morning and then went on a walk. And it was like we were like tripping or something. The movie had turned us so wide open to nature that I saw things differently. It's a walk I had taken for years. This is a piece called Hemingway Home, Key West, Florida. And it also has a quote. This is from Ernest Hemingway. "An intelligent man is sometimes forced to be drunk, to spend time with his fools." That's an important his. "You'll want to slip past the long line of tourists, flash your invisible writer badge, and the old man at the gate, susceptible to this easy Jedi mind trick, will wave you through. Nod at the hostess on the front porch steps as if you know one another well, and follow the group into the foyer. Take a quick walk through the upstairs rooms if you'd like, then come down and peek into the dining room. Or skip the house tour altogether. There's nothing in there beyond standard house and garden wares. How could there be? Ignore the plethora of 6-toed cats lounging in tropical shade as you head to the back corner of the compound. There you'll find Hemingway's writing studio floating like a moon above an aquamarine pool. Don't expect to find anything of value up in the great man's writing room, not even the typewriter, though there is something to peering into that cage that serves as gentle reminder of what's really at stake. Make sure to end up poolside. Go ahead, take off your shoes and stick your tired legs into the cold water. Allow the scene to blossom in front of your eyes. The drunk writer lurching into a lounge chair, the bored beauty painting her toes in the shade, the sweating agent with papers to sign, the murderous butler under the banyan leaves muttering terse notes to self while one of Papa's children lays face down in the sun, encased by a slowly expanding cocoon of wet concrete, shivering. This one's called Houdini on the Prowl. It's set in Vermont at the Vermont Studio Center, which had been closed down for a couple of years. And I was taking a tour with one of the guys who manages the property, and he was showing me all the things that had changed during that time of inactivity. Houdini on the Prowl. Some cats seem forever to stalk down alleyways. There's a subtle swagger to their gait, the casual ease of a gunfighter passing down an empty main street. Houdini is such a cat. Bruiser, Mauser, Tom. He's been following us as we tour the grounds, stops with us as we note the conspicuous absence of this old barn, that tumble-down garage. Trimming back before regrowth is how one trustee phrased it. Taking dead weight offline is Jim's. Whatever it's called, it's eerie and quietly exhilarating to come upon half-remembered forms floating over freshly seeded plots like seeing ghosts. When we come out of the moldy basement of a building slated for refurbishment, Houdini slinks down the steps and disappears into the murk. Jim leaves the door open, and we head over to the river, past the shadow of another structure and through a newly opened field. I have made my way down here a dozen times, which makes me feel now like a tracker coming upon an old scent. This way to the river bend, that way to the old baseball field, now an arboretum. Trevor says he's not been down here since COVID shut it down. Before turning back, we talk about past complications, social and otherwise, and share hope for some small portion of healing. We pause at an old carriage barn, now a smoking hut, where I am told an occasional through hiker sets up camp before being kindly shooed away. The afternoon chill creeps under our shirts. Houdini reappears, cobwebs crowning his head. He watches for a moment, yawns, licks his paw. And this last piece is called At the Waffle House. 3 line cooks, 3 waitresses, 2 managers, man facing customers, woman calling out orders, smothered covered over easy steak and eggs. Left side cook sets up plates, keeps waffles coming. Right side cook grills the meat, replaces the egg basket over the counter, over the center cook's head as he turns out omelets, hash browns, and eggs. The waitresses float back and forth, setting down full plates, picking up empties, refilling coffees, bringing more toast for all last night's prom goers, some still in their gowns and tuxes, this morning's soccer players in their dirty uniforms next to rumpled dads. All the extra personnel in town for military week line out the door. All I can think is the manager listens to one of her waitresses complain about some wrong and answers, communication is key, meaning, I hear you, and I got your back, but now is not the time for any more of that. And the waitress walks off, still fuming, but nodding her head. Is we need more of this, whatever this is I'm witnessing here in Goldsboro, North Carolina, 9:30 in the morning, the early morning rain outside, already beginning to sizzle a little on the asphalt, and all the lights turning green. Thanks.
Thank you, Sebastian. I love going to each of those places with you. So vivid.
Thanks.
Next up, we have Jacqui Castle. Jacqui will be leading a class titled Writer's Room for Novelists, and they are going to meet in person at Hanger Hall on Tuesday evenings starting February 21st. Jacqui is an educator and novelist. Her work has appeared in a variety of publications, including The Mountain Express, WNC Woman, Asheville Grit, and Explore Asheville. Her novel, The Seclusion, which library School Library Journal, called a must-have for all libraries and fans of sci-fi, garnered Jacqui the title of 2020 Indie Author of the Year through the Indie Author Project. Jacqui has taught creative writing workshops through the Carolina Mountains Lit Festival, the Young Eager Writers Association, Indie Author Project, the Writing Heights Writers Conference, and more. When not writing, Jacqui can be found hanging out with her family and consuming far too much caffeine. Welcome, Jacqui.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here and happy to see familiar faces I haven't seen in a while. Today, I'm going to read you kind of a rough draft. So we're just going to dive in and have fun with that. So this is a work in progress. I actually read the opening last time we did a Writers at Home, and so I'm going to read a different excerpt. So this story takes place in kind of a dystopian future where the sun has become too strong for people to comfortably live outside. So they are kind of following a nocturnal animal schedule and working and playing and being outside at night. The protagonist's son has gone missing, and the mother, who is the protagonist, suspects that he has ended up in this weird kind of country club scene up the hill. So I'm going to start where she is traveling up there to look for him. And we'll just hope that it's fun and we're not missing too much plot. I left the safety of the overhead lights and skirted the grounds. Though the surface was steep, it was also smooth, the artificial grass pleasant under my feet. I stooped down to feel the springy blades with my hand and navigated by the light of my phone, every once in a while casting a look down to the city. It looked so far away, the downtown strip, a beautiful river of lights, all of its problems and pitfalls invisible to the naked eye. My home was an unrecognizable square roof, indistinct from those surrounding it. This was the furthest I had gone from home in decades, and the realization was wild. I was simply up the side of the valley. An eeriness coated me as I inched closer to the complex. It felt as though the air was shifting. At first, I suspected it was the altitude, but rather than thinning, it felt like the air was thickening somehow, like the buildings up ahead had their own atmosphere that swallowed me a little more with each step. I propelled myself forward, the steep climb painting me with sweat that immediately chilled in the night air. I kept walking, one foot in front of the other, the entire time wondering what security measures waited and whether the kids had already encountered them. I was almost there. The fence around the complex was now perhaps 100 yards away. I kept my eyes peeled for any sign of Henry or Angie, hoping I would pass them up here and simply turn us all around. The light from the complex soon hit me, and I continued slowly, inching forward until I was just a few yards from a slatted perimeter fence. It looked to be built of a burnished metal of some kind, with slats a few inches thick and gaps slightly larger than a hand. I would not be able to squeeze through. I spotted movement, and with nowhere to hide, I dropped to the ground, landing hard on my knee as I did so. A small child, no older than 3, stood by the gate. The child had spotted me, and she peeked out from behind one post as if it were a parent's leg. I hadn't expected to see children up here, but now that I did, I realized it was only logical. If there was a community, there would be children. I forced a playful smile, then held my finger up to my mouth, signaling to the child to remain quiet, to not give away my position. A small lopsided grin danced across her face, and I exhaled, clinging to the hope that she would play along. As I stood back up, a pain shot from my knee into my hip. The child continued to watch as I neared, but didn't run. Her blonde hair hung in ringlets that danced around her cherubic face and down to her shoulders. A jumper the color of ripe blueberries glistened as she stood under the overhead street lamp. The clothing did not look warm enough to protect her from the night air, but she did not shiver. There was something piercing about her eyes, but I couldn't tell what it was just yet. They drew me closer, unable to ignore my curiosity. Soon I stopped, realizing what was so captivating. They were glowing. I froze, afraid yet unable to stop looking at the girl. She smiled playfully, and soon I was moving again, walking slowly as if the eyes were reeling me in. Her irises were bright turquoise, with pupils that were slitted rather than round, like those of a cat. The playful smirk disappeared as the child's lips drooped, and I realized I hadn't hidden my fear well. Her skin was light, almost translucent. No, not translucent. It was shimmering. Was she wearing glitter? The light from the street lamp bounced off of it, and I felt dizzy. She's just a child, I told myself. I held up a hand, signaling everything was going to be okay, as I recognized a slight tremble in her chin. It's okay, I mouthed. The girl looked up and took a step back. A tear was traveling down her cheek. Damn it, I said under my breath. I was so close to her now. I dropped to my knees on the other side of the fence and chanced speaking out loud. It's okay, I won't hurt you, I said, trying unsuccessfully to keep my voice steady. I focused on the girl's cheeks. They were just the trembling cheeks of a child. I was just startled by your beautiful eyes. The girl seemed to soften and wiped the moisture from her face. What's your name? I asked gently. The girl stared, her piercing eyes boring into my brain, holding me in a staring contest I was afraid to break. They were impossibly bright. Where had I seen something like this before? The word my friend S had used came in all at once. Eye shine. No, they must be contacts, though I'd never met a child so young that wore them. When the girl finally answered, her voice was high-pitched and penetrating. Daisy. Daisy, I turned the name around in my mind, spinning it and tasting it, trying to make it fit with the picture I was seeing in front of me. The unease intensified. Where are your parents, Daisy? I asked as I lowered myself further down on my heels and my head became heavy. The light from the complex suddenly felt too strong. I was too exposed. Daisy didn't answer. The child's eyes flickered. I could feel my blood pressure continue to drop and forced a smile. My name is Nora, I said. The girl didn't reply. It's nice to meet you, I continued. I lifted my hand and it trembled as I reached it out toward a gap in the fence slats, extending it to Daisy. The girl took a step back, and before I could reach her, a searing pain traveled up my arm and through my body. Suddenly, everything was dark. She was spinning, standing in the middle of a large foyer, turning and turning. Her tiny arms were thrown out to the side, her palms open, and suddenly she stopped, inviting me in to dance with her. I wanted to go to her, to take her hand in mine and to spin, but I couldn't move. The floor climbed past the soles of my shoes, up my ankles, and to my calves until I was part of it and it was part of me. When I came to, I was lying in a bed and my head was pounding. Oblong cobalt lights stretched across the ceiling above. They were harsh and my eyes protested as I forced them to stay open and look around. My vision was blurry and it was as if I was viewing the room from underwater, everything slightly intangible. The room was small, about the size of a child's bedroom. There was a vase of flowers on the table next to me and an armchair in the corner. I tried to remember what had happened. 1 second, I'd been reaching toward the little girl. Daisy? The next, an excruciating pain had traveled up my fingertips, through my arm and into my chest. At first, I thought maybe the pain had come from her. But no, I hadn't touched the girl. My hand had not made it that far. I pressed my fingertips together to find that those on my right hand were tender. There must have been an electrical current running through the slats. Henry, I whispered his name as I tried to sit up. Though my body ached as I swung my legs over the side of the bed, I seemed free of serious injury. The only persistent pain was in my knee, and I remembered slamming it in the ground when I first saw Daisy. The room was clearer now. It appeared to be a medical recovery room, similar to a hospital room, but spruced up slightly. There were paintings on the walls featuring abstract patterns and swirls of color. Floor-to-ceiling cabinets lined 2 of the walls, each with locks too thick to go unnoticed. How long had I been unconscious? Panic shot through me as I wondered if the sun was now out. I raised my arm to check the time, only to discover that where my watch had been, there was now a foreign band, thick and cold against my flesh. What the hell? I murmured. It was about 1 inch in width, and a glowing red dot the size of a candle flame sat in the center. I pressed the dot, but nothing happened. I ran my fingers over the burnished gray surface. I tried to remove the band, wedging an index finger under it, but it would not budge. I used my nail to pick at it, searching for an end like you would on a roll of tape, but there was nothing. Let's stop there.
Thank you, Jacqui. I've loved hearing all of you read. I think that Bruce Spang is next up, but I think he may be having some problems with his connection. Yeah, so I do want to tell you about Bruce's class that's coming up. His workshop is titled Developing a Natural Style, Elizabeth Bishop Generative Poetry Workshop. It's going to meet online on Tuesday evening starting March 21st. And just to tell you a little bit about Bruce, he's the former poet laureate of Portland and the author of 2 novels. His most recent collection of poems, All You'll Derive, A Caregiver's Journey, was published in 2020. He's also published 4 other books of poems. along with several anthologies and chapbooks. He's the poetry and fiction editor of Smoky Blue Literary and Arts magazine. So there's spaces left in that class and in several other Great Smokies classes. So please sign up for those if you can. Go to our website to find out more about that. Also, our next Writers at Home event is going to be February 19th at 5 p.m. We're going to have a panel of writers talking about their experiences in publishing, both traditional publishing and non-traditional. So it should be an interesting discussion. There'll be time to ask questions, and that's going to be at 5 p.m. and it's a hybrid event, meaning we will be in person at Malaprops. The panel will be in person, but you can also join via Zoom. So thank you all so much for reading today. It was a pleasure hearing you all. Thank you again to Malaprops, and thank you to those of you who joined us to listen. We'll see you in February.